Something you should know about me is I love history. If I wanted to, I could just stand up here and go on and on about some obscure historical figure or battle or document and how it fundamentally changed the course of human events. But I won't subject you to that. Instead, what I want to focus on is why some of you might have just started tuning me out or your eyes just started glazing over. Because here's the thing, I don't think the issue is with the subject matter. Because I think history is very interesting, it's engaging, it's exciting, but that's not how most people feel. You get a lot of boredom and indifference. And why do you think that is? Think back to when you were first learning about history as a kid in school. Do you remember an old, heavy, out-of-date textbook that was missing a bunch of pages from it? Or do you remember a teacher dryly explaining a concept while occasionally pointing to something she wrote on the board? Or do you remember getting to visit a museum where you were just excited to get out of school for the day and you never felt the need to go back and visit it again? See, that's the issue. When you think back on these memories, can you even remember what the lesson was about? So how do we as a society fix this problem? How do we get schools and museums to make history more interesting for the people who are learning it, and so they'll retain that important information going forward? Well, my first suggestion would be to replace those old, burdensome textbooks and get some lightweight tablets instead. Electronic textbooks are already becoming more common in lots of schools, and they're generally pretty cheaper and much more up-to-date than your average textbook. And using tablets would also allow teachers to create more interactive learning experiences, where they could have students use websites where they can build recreations of historic sites, or use video games that take place during different time periods to teach them about that time and place. I also feel like another way that we could be using technology in this way to teach history is through social media. Companies and organizations already reach out and engage with people on Instagram, Snapchat, and Twitter, so why shouldn't universities and museums be doing the same thing? Some of you might know that some museums and universities are doing this. You'll see them post about fun facts or photos of artifacts or information about upcoming events. And this all helps spread that information much farther than, say, a paper flyer in the street might. Like a few dozen people might read that, but that same information online could be seen by thousands. And that's the thing. New technology can help these organizations to better engage with people about this topic. But I know what you're thinking. Are you picturing a bunch of old teachers and museum workers trying to understand how their phones work? So I think my second suggestion would be to highlight the work of young historians, because there's already, all across this country, there are museum interns and student teachers and other young workers in history professions who are doing great work that isn't getting a lot of recognition. So I feel like advertising for historical organizations should highlight that work and focus on how these young workers are making a difference right now, and that can encourage people to take more of an interest in the subject going forward. For instance, museums could allow young interns to run their social media pages, and that would allow them to write posts about interesting, important information about history in a way that a lot of younger people would take notice of. I also believe that inside the museum, you could have a lot of more younger workers in charge of leading the tour groups through the museum, and they could explain the stories behind those artifacts and exhibits in a way that more people would appreciate. Which brings me to my third point, which, speaking of inside the museum and the exhibits, we should be creating new kinds of museum exhibits. A lot of the museums you see have a lot of old, out-of-date exhibits that are in desperate need of updates or replacements. So we're going to have to create ones that are more reflective of modern times and issues. Create an exhibit that reflects what's going on currently. Like you could create a temporary exhibit focusing on the effects that politics have on a local community that would encourage people from that community to come visit the museum, and that would connect them to the other exhibits and maybe certain ideas about history that they were less interested in beforehand. This would also allow an opportunity for museums to integrate new technology into their exhibits, like smartphone apps or interactive touchscreens, which would allow them to display far more details and facts than an exhibit could ever have displayed before. And there are already young historians working to make this a possibility, and that change is becoming more apparent in modern museums as we speak. So as I've rambled here today, you're probably wondering why the talk about history and thus the past is so focused on the future. But that's the thing. History is never ending, and our understanding of the past is constantly evolving. So why should the way we teach history continue unchanged? How we teach this information to new generations will affect what happens in the future as those generations grow up and they have to learn from the past to better reflect what's going on in their present. And as the saying goes, those who don't learn from history are doomed to have to take the class again next semester. Thank you for coming to my TED Talk.